The first storm came early that year. Wind roared through the canyons like a wounded animal, and snow piled on the pines like grief. Callum Brooks stood at the edge of his porch, coat open, cigarette burning between cracked lips, watching the last of the light vanish behind the teeth of the mountains. Winter was closing in, and the mountains were always hungry. He lived alone, by choice. A man who didn't take to town anymore. A man who once rode with Army scouts and buried too many names under shallow rock. He spoke little, ate less, slept light, and when the hunger for a voice not his own became too sharp to ignore, he left a single note at the supply post in Black Hollow. Cook needed. Cabin is clean. Pay in pelts. Room by fire. TB. 2 weeks passed. Then, on the third day of frost, just before nightfall, he heard the knock. 3 times, slow, steady, as if the hand behind it was careful not to hope too hard. He opened the door, and there she stood. A woman, wrapped in a wool coat too thin for the pass, snow melting off her shoulders. Wind pushed strands of dark hair across her face, but her eyes were steady, gray, like winter rivers. Her hands were raw, her boots cracked, and she was pregnant. "Name's Anna," she said, voice rough but composed. "Widow, can cook." Callum said nothing at first. His eyes dropped to her belly, then back up. He nodded, stepped aside. She didn't thank him, just stepped inside and placed a small, weather-stained bag by the wall. The fire popped. The wind howled. The door shut. She didn't ask where to sleep. She simply rolled her sleeves and began cleaning the counter with a rag pulled from her pocket. When she found the dried blood near the chopping block, she didn't flinch, just scrubbed harder. By morning, she had made broth from dried meat, used melted snow to soak the salt out of beans, and swept every inch of the floor with a pine branch broom she fashioned herself. Callum watched her from his chair, saying little. He had questions, but none of them came out. That evening, he found her in the shed, sharpening a blade on a whetstone like she'd done it 1,000 times. She stood straight despite the weight in her stomach, face calm, movements precise. He asked her if she'd done this kind of work before. She only said, "Enough to know it don't wait for a man." Nights passed. He'd never say it aloud, but the smell of cooking herbs in the cabin made his lungs ache in a way bullets never did. She never sang, but once, while washing clothes near the stream, she hummed something low and sad. Callum didn't recognize the tune, but it followed him back to the cabin, curling behind his ribs like smoke. One morning, he came in from chopping to find her stitching a torn blanket with meticulous hands. Her brow was tight with concentration. He offered her a second chair. She nodded. "You were in the Army," she said, not as a question. "Scout. Thought so. You move like someone who's slept in trees." He didn't respond, just sipped his tea. Later that night, she handed him a bowl of stew and sat across from him. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It felt earned, like 2 people holding the edges of something fragile and old. "What's your last name?" he asked finally. She stirred the fire with a stick before answering. When she did, her voice was quiet but clear. "Rourke. Anna Rourke." He dropped the spoon. The clatter echoed off the walls like a shot. His hands went still, staring at her as if she'd just spoken a ghost into the room. She looked up, confused, but he wasn't seeing her anymore. He was seeing snow, blood, a ravine, a man screaming behind him as he ran. Rourke. He remembered the man's face. Red-bearded, kind eyes, too kind for the work they were doing. They'd been caught in a blizzard, lost half the pack mules. Rourke had gone down in the storm, leg crushed under a slide. Callum had tried to dig him out, but the wind screamed too loud, and the cold bit too deep. He told himself Rourke was dead when he left him. But now that name sat across from him, stirring the fire, belly full with life. And Callum Brooks felt something twist inside him, so sharp it nearly took his breath. He stood slowly, walked to the door, opened it, and let the cold hit him straight in the face. He needed to feel it, because ghosts don't knock. But she had. Callum didn't sleep that night. He sat in his chair, boots still on, staring at the fire like it owed him an answer. The name echoed in his head like a church bell through fog. Rourke. He hadn't said it aloud in years, but it never really left. It had clung to him through snowstorms and silence, gnawed at his gut every time he laid down on a dry bed, knowing another man never made it home. But she didn't know. She couldn't. Could she? She moved around the cabin the next morning as if nothing had changed. Maybe it hadn't for her. She boiled water, added dried herbs, fixed a loose brick in the hearth. When she caught him watching her, she only said, "It's going to be a long winter. Best we prepare early." He nodded, but said nothing. His voice felt heavy, like it would crack if he tried to use it. Flashbacks came in pieces. He saw the old ridge, snow turning pink beneath them. Rourke coughing blood, grabbing Callum's sleeve, begging, "Tell my Anna, I loved her, please," but the wind had swallowed the last word before it reached the sky. Callum had run. Told himself Rourke was gone already. Told himself a lot of things. Anna's voice brought him back. "You got any more salt?" He opened the cabinet without turning around, handed it to her. Their fingers brushed. She didn't flinch. He nearly did. That night, he heard her humming again. The tune was quiet, almost lullaby-like, but it turned his stomach. He walked outside, sat on the porch. The stars above were sharp and cold, like broken glass scattered across black velvet. Then he heard it. Branches cracking. Slow. Heavy. He stood, rifle already in his hands, instinct sharp. A bear, big and gray-backed, ambled from the tree line, sniffing the air. Too close. Too bold. He stepped forward, raising the rifle. Inside, the cabin door creaked open, and his voice, "Don't shoot unless it charges." He glanced back. She stood just behind the door, holding a frying pan, like it was a weapon forged by grief itself. Her eyes were fierce, not afraid. The bear growled low, took one step forward, then, perhaps sensing the steel in their silence, turned and lumbered away into the dark. They didn't speak, but something passed between them in that moment. Something solid and wordless. By the next morning, Anna was chopping carrots at the table like the night hadn't happened. She handed him a tin of salve and said, "Put that on your knuckles. You grip too tight." He didn't ask how she knew. Later that week, he handed her an axe. She raised an eyebrow. "Figured you should know how to split logs," he said. She took it, walked to the chopping stump, and buried the blade in a birch round with the precision of someone who'd done harder things. "Figured you should know how to dress a wound," she replied later, wrapping a cloth tight around his bruised forearm with practiced hands. Trust didn't arrive in words. It came in gestures, in sharing silence, and warming the same soup pot. He almost told her that night. They sat by the fire. She was mending a tear in one of his shirts. Her eyes were softer than he'd ever seen them. He opened his mouth. But before he could speak, she handed him a cup of tea and said gently, "Some silences are better kept until spring." He didn't answer, just nodded and drank. Outside, snow began falling again. The days turned slower. She made the cabin feel less like a grave and more like something that remembered how to breathe. Then came a quiet evening when the fire crackled warm, and Callum was carving a bit of antler into a knife handle. Anna sat across from him, hands resting on the swell of her stomach. She looked at the flames. "He'll be born here, I think," she said softly. Callum looked up, surprised. She nodded. "Doctor in Black Hollow said so. Before I left. Said I'd make it through the winter if I found shelter." Callum didn't know what to say. He just nodded, eyes back on his carving. "I'll name him Rourke," she added. "After his father." The blade slipped in Callum's hand. He didn't bleed, but he may as well have. He set down the handle, stood slowly, and walked to the door. Snow was already dusting the porch. He stepped into it, boots crunching, not bothering to put on a coat. The cold hit him hard, but not as hard as her words. He stared out at the tree line, breathing sharp, eyes burning. He had thought grief was a thing you buried. Turns out it just waits. The storm came down like a hammer. It started with whispers, wind brushing tree limbs, powder dusting the porch, then built into a howl that shook the shutters and howled through the chinks in the logs like a living thing. Snow hit sideways, biting and blind. For 2 days, they didn't speak much. Wood was stacked high, but food was thinning fast. Callum paced like a caged bear. He checked the traps near the shed. Empty. No squirrels. No rabbits. He couldn't wait it out. "I'll be back by dusk," he said on the third morning, pulling on his coat. Anna looked up from peeling potatoes. "In this storm, Got an old trap line 2 miles east. Maybe something left. She didn't argue. Just stood, pulled a scarf from a drawer, and handed it to him. Take this. Wind'll cut through you otherwise. He nodded, tucked it into his collar, and stepped out into the white. The world outside was ghost-colored. Trees sagged under the weight of snow. His boots sank deep, crunching each step, rifle slung across his back. He moved fast, eyes scanning for motion, any sign of tracks, fur, blood. But what he found stopped him cold. Not deer. Boot prints. Wide, dragging boots, at least 3 sets, maybe more. Men, armed, from the depth and angle of their stride. Moving south, toward the valley, toward the cabin. Bandits. Outlaws. Or worse, deserters turned wild. No law reached this high, and winter made desperate things crawl out from the woods. Callum turned back without checking a single trap. He moved fast, chest burning, snow in his beard. By the time he reached the cabin, dusk was pressing against the windows. He burst through the door. Anna stood at the stove. "What is it?" she asked, instinctively moving one hand over her belly. "Men. Maybe 4. Half a day behind me, maybe less." She said nothing, but her eyes darkened. He grabbed boards, nails, hammer. "Help me," he muttered. She did. They sealed the windows, shoved a dresser in front of the door. He loaded both rifles, checked the powder on his old flintlock pistol, sharpened the knife in his belt. Every sound outside, branches snapping, wind groaning, felt like boots on snow. That night they sat in the dark. The lantern was blown out. The fire smoldered low. The only light came from the crackling coals and the reflection in their eyes. Then laughter. Far off, male voices, echoing faint over the snow. Callum was up in an instant, grabbing his rifle. He looked back to find Anna already holding the second one, hands steady. "You think I don't know how to shoot?" she whispered. "He taught me." She cocked the hammer like she was lighting a lantern. Outside, the snow fell silently, waiting for blood. The night held its breath. Snow clung to the trees like cotton packed in wounds, and darkness poured into every crack of the world. Inside the cabin, Callum checked his rifle for the 3rd time. The fire was out. The room was cold. Still, Anna sat across from him, back against the wall, belly tight beneath her coat. Her breath came slower than usual, but her hands didn't shake. The second rifle rested across her knees. Then came the boots. Crunch, crunch, crunch. 3 silhouettes moved through the trees, vague against the pre-dawn gray. No talking now, just movement. Calculated. Lethal. The lead man stepped onto the porch with the confidence of a dog who'd torn through too many camps. Knife on his belt. Rifle slung loose. Callum raised his hand, waited. The door rattled. Anna didn't flinch. The knob turned. Callum shot first. Wood splintered as the bullet tore through the doorframe, missing the man by inches. He stumbled back, fired wild, hitting nothing but bark and snow. Then all hell broke loose. The second man looped around the side, trying to break into the barn. Anna rose fast, pressed her belly against the wall for balance, and fired clean through the window. The glass shattered. The man screamed, dropped his weapon, vanished into the tree line. Callum ran out the front, boots pounding against the porch. He dove behind the water barrel, returned fire. Bullets slapped the cabin walls like hard rain. Somewhere behind the shed, a third voice barked orders. Anna kept low inside, eyes on the back window. Her lips whispered something, prayer or memory, no one could tell. Then a shadow crossed behind her. She turned too late. A hand grabbed her hair, yanked her backward, and a blade pressed her throat. A fourth man, hiding, waiting. "Well now," he growled, breath sour. "Ain't this cozy?" She didn't scream. She didn't shake. Instead, she spoke slow. "You don't want to meet the man behind you." The bandit laughed. "What man?" Click. The hammer pulled back behind him. Callum stood at the doorway, his face calm, rifle aimed. The bandit tensed. One shot. The man dropped like a tree. Blood soaked the floorboards. Callum lowered the rifle and fell to one knee. He'd been shot. Right shoulder. Anna rushed to him, caught his weight. "No," she whispered. "You don't get to leave this time." He grunted, hand clutching her coat for balance. "I won't. Not again." She helped him to the bed, tore her apron into strips, wrapped his wound, worked fast and without panic like she'd done this before. When it was over, she sat beside him and wiped blood from his face. Outside, the mountain fell silent again. Just the wind, the trees, the fading footsteps of two men retreating into shame. 3 days passed. Callum didn't leave the bed. Fever took him, but he fought it like everything else, with teeth clenched and eyes burning. Anna stayed close, tending the fire, mashing roots into poultices, humming lullabies to a baby not yet born. Then, one morning, as the storm finally broke, her water did too. She didn't cry out. She just knelt by the hearth and called his name. "I need you." He pulled himself up. Weak, bleeding still, but he made it to her. The birth took hours. He held her hand the whole time. And when it was done, when the first cries filled the room like sunlight through cloud, he wept. A boy, healthy, loud, covered in life. She wrapped him a shawl and looked at Callum with eyes full of things she hadn't said yet. "I'll name him Rourke," she said softly. "Rourke Callum." He blinked. "That's too much." "No," she said. "It's just enough." They didn't speak of family. They didn't say love. But the next morning, when Callum rose to chop wood with one arm, she followed him out to the porch, babe in arms. They sat beside each other, watching mist rise off the pines. He exhaled slow. "I thought I came to these mountains to disappear," he murmured. Anna looked at him. Maybe it was to begin again. He didn't answer, but the way he reached over and touched the boy's hand said enough. Somewhere over the ridge, a bird sang, first one of the season. Below their boots, 2 sets of tracks in the snow. One large, one tiny, and behind them, the blood had already been buried by the wind.